Yesterday, the Trudeau Liberals introduced their second censorship bill called C-36. It's not to be confused with their first censorship bill, C-10. It helps to look at these things in a logical order. C-10, their censorship bill that just passed the House of Commons, allows the Liberal government to take over the internet in Canada. It puts things under government jurisdiction. It lets the government regulate websites like rebelnews.com in the same manner they've always regulated big TV broadcasters and radio stations. So Trudeau is now the boss of YouTube in Canada. He's the boss of Facebook. But this next bill that was just introduced yesterday, it had to wait until the first one was through the House of Commons because they didn't want anyone to see the next step in their plan until the first step was already taken. Bill C-36 is called an act to amend the Criminal Code and Canadian Human Rights Act and to make related amendments to another act, hate propaganda, hate crimes, and hate speech. Okay, well, hate propaganda is already in our criminal code. Did you know that? I don't think it should be. I don't think hate propaganda should be a crime. I don't like hate propaganda. I don't like people calling for genocide or things like that. But I just don't think having terrible ideas in itself is a crime. Section 318 of our criminal code makes it a crime to advocate for genocide. Section 319 makes it a crime to incite hatred. I think it should be a crime to incite violence. But hatred is a feeling. It's a human emotion. I think it's just bizarre to make emotions, even bad emotions, into crimes. It's actions we want to criminalize. Actions that hurt people, not what you think or feel. My point is those are, for better or for worse, already in our criminal law. But this new bill goes much, much further. I have read this bill through twice now, and I have to say, this is the worst law I have ever seen in a Western democracy. And by the way, I'm going to ask you to go to stopc36.com and sign our petition against it, and I'll tell you what we'll do with that later. This law, C-36, legislates cancel culture in the worst way. I'll take you through it. Normally, I would just summarize the law, but I think it's important that you see the details for yourself. It's been about 24 hours, and I actually haven't seen much media treatment of certain parts of this bill at all, which is odd. It's not a very long bill. It's 26 pages in total, but 6 of those pages are blank or just sort of title pages, and half of it is the French version. So there's only about 10 pages of reading involved. It's not that long. So how did the media miss the worst part of it? Here, let's just go through it. Remember, the central purpose of this bill, as you can see from its title, is to ban hate. So obviously they have to define hate, and they say hatred means the emotion that involves detestation or vilification and that is stronger than dislike or disdain. I think it's really weird to pass criminal laws about emotions. I think it's an attempt to play God, to tell people how they're supposed to feel and supposed to think. You can't command someone to feel a certain way. You can't pass a law commanding love or banning hate. And the audacity to think that you can, that arrogance, I'm guessing that will actually create more hate. Hate comes from an underlying sense of a grievance, whether that grievance is justified or not. You may have a very good reason to feel hate, or you might have a terrible reason. It might be based on bigotry or fear, but unless that underlying grievance issue is dealt with, the government coming along and simply saying to stop you from feeling a certain way, it's not going to convince you to stop feeling a certain way. Probably make it worse. So you hear that first part, detestation and vilification, and that is stronger than dislike or disdain. All right. But then they say this: for greater certainty, the communication of a statement does not incite or promote hatred for the purpose of this section solely because it discredits, humiliates, hurts, or offends. What? So if you humiliate someone, hurt them, and offend them, that doesn't necessarily mean you've committed hate. So it's stronger than dislike or disdain, but maybe not humiliation. Can you imagine entire trials being held about this? I'll tell you what that word salad really means. I think it's designed to be vague on purpose, so that it means whatever the government wants it to mean at any given moment. Justin Trudeau, I'm sorry to say it, he's full of hatred for people he doesn't like, i.e. his political opponents. Trudeau constantly calls his opponents racist and sexist and homophobic. So does the rest of his cabinet. They even call their enemies Nazis sometimes. But by having such vague and subjective definitions in the law, they can guarantee that they will only prosecute their enemies' hatred, never their own hatred. Trudeau's full of hate, but he'll never be prosecuted under this. Or put another way, we're all guilty of hate. We just have to know who the government's going to choose to prosecute. Every single human hates something and loves something and is sad about something. It's part of our humanity. It's part of our healthy, normal personalities. Part of being a good person is learning how to control your darker emotions, hatred, sorrow, jealousy, etc., and to express them positively and to work on them. I think some of the best people among us take their darker feelings and transform them into something constructive, whether it's just energy for hard work or even art or positive political change. I think hatred, a sense of injustice or hurt at an underlying grievance, is a major motivation for people to fix the world, to fix that underlying grievance, wouldn't you? The best people take something they hate and are inspired to fix it. So I think we're all guilty of these thought crimes, these emotion crimes. We just are. So now it comes down to who will be prosecuted. Since we're all guilty, this is cancel culture turned into law. Now here's the part of the bill everyone expected. 8 years ago, Stephen Harper and the Conservatives repealed the censorship provision in the Human Rights Act. It's being replaced with very similar language. I'll just read it to you. Communication of hate speech. It is a discriminatory practice to communicate or cause to be communicated hate speech by means of the internet or other means of telecommunication in a context in which the hate speech is likely to foment detestation or vilification of an individual or group of individuals on the basis of a prohibited ground of discrimination. It's a lot of words there. So that's what I was charged with 15 years ago when I published the Danish cartoons of Mohammed. Publishing something likely to, that is, maybe it will, maybe it won't, foment detestation or vilification. Back then they used the word hate, same things, I think. But who knows if something will foment hate? I mean, that's so subjective. When you watch that old movie Schindler's List, you know, the one about the Holocaust, maybe you come away with, what's that phrase? Detesting or vilifying Germans. I mean, it's also subjective, and it's also future tense, likely to foment bad feelings. Maybe it will, maybe it won't. But these days, with a professional class of official offense takers, of people who are perpetually upset with things, perpetually mad, perpetually aggrieved, we're really giving the most thin-skinned person in the room the ability to decide what's legal or not. But look at this innovation. This wasn't here in the law when Harper repealed it. For the purposes of subsection 1, a person who communicates or causes to be communicated hate speech continues to do so for as long as the hate speech remains public and the person can remove or block access to it. So if you wrote something dumb on Twitter or Facebook 5 or 10 years ago, and it's still up there, you're still guilty of that hate crime today. Unlike every other kind of law you can think of, there's no statute of limitations. For most lawsuits, you have 2 years to go to court. Not for internet thought crimes. If you publish something, I don't know, way back in the day on MySpace or Friendster, decades ago when you were a teenager, you're still breaking the law today. That's what this law says. But look at this. This is officially crazy. Complaints about hate speech can now be made in secret. And these secret complainants can get up to 20 grand in cash from their target for making a complaint. Let me read it. Non-disclosure of identity. The Commission may deal with a complaint in relation to a discriminatory practice described in Section 13 without disclosing to the person against whom the complaint was filed or to any other person the identity of the alleged victim. the individual or group of individuals who has filed the complaint, or any individual who has given evidence or assisted the Commission in any way in dealing with the complaint, if the Commission considers there is a real and substantial risk that any of those individuals will be subjected to threats, intimidation, or discrimination. And remember, they describe discrimination as hard feelings. So just secret courts now, secret witnesses, secret complaints made by secret complainants. So who keeps filing complaints against you? Is it your ex-wife or your ex-husband? Is it a disgruntled former employee? Maybe a business partner you had a falling out with? Someone with a grudge? Is it a vexatious litigant? Someone like Richard Warman or Yaniv, who just kept filing complaint after complaint as a malicious hobby? Or is it one of the many lobby groups funded by the Liberal government who actually go around and stir up trouble and file complaints against conservatives and other enemies of the left? We showed you how a disgraced group with the ironic name Canadian Anti-Hate Network signed a contract for $250,000 with the Liberal government specifically to hunt conservatives on the internet and file complaints about them. Secret complaints about you. So much for your ancient right of being able to face your accuser. The law also gives these kangaroo courts the power to order the media not to reveal the identity of the complainers either. One of the reasons our justice system is public is so that there can be no hidden agendas. But here, not only is there no disincentive to nasty, woke, professional complainers, but there are actually rewards too. Unlike in a real court, you don't even have to pay for a lawyer with your own money. Trudeau will take care of all that for you, but you will get a huge 20 grand windfall if you win. Here's what you can get if you complain that someone said something hateful about you on the internet. In order to cease the discriminatory practice and take measures in consultation with the Commission on the general purposes of the measures to redress the practice or to prevent the same or a similar practice from reoccurring. Remember, they're talking about just hate speech, right? They're not actually talking about crimes like stabbing someone or robbing something. They're talking about emotion crimes. You said something that caused another person to have hard feelings about a third person. How do you stop that from recurring? Are you going to jail someone? You're going to literally duct tape their mouths? Actually, they have jailed people in the past. The very first case of hate speech decades ago under the Human Rights Commission, they sent someone to jail. The very first target. He was a 70-year-old man, some cranky guy who wouldn't unplug his telephone answering machine. This was back before voicemail. This was like in the 90s. He had an old answering machine that had like an outgoing tape and an incoming tape. He put racist messages on his telephone answering machine. He wouldn't delete them, so they threw him in jail. That's what they're going to do. So what else? Well, in order to pay compensation of not more than $20,000 to any victim personally identified in the communication that constituted the discriminatory practice. So 20 grand for being the subject of a mean tweet, eh? And you never have to reveal your identity to complain. Where's the cash? I mean, sign me up. I'm kidding. I'm the subject of hate every day from liberals. But you see, that's the good kind of hate, to hate conservatives. I'll never get to put my enemies on trial in a secret court with a 20 grand payoff to me. But I bet you I'll be targeted by this court, don't you think? 20 grand to the secret complainer. Plus, pay another 50 grand to Trudeau. Let me read. In order to pay a penalty of not more than $50,000 to the Receiver General. So it's worse than it even was before Harper repealed the law. The penalties are much higher. The complainant gets to keep his identity secret. Warman and Yaniv will love that. So it's as bad as everyone thought, but that's not really what this law is about. That's the distraction. That's what the media is focused on. This law has something much, much worse in it, much, much darker. It's the reason I say this is the worst law I have ever seen in a democracy ever. This law would give anyone the power to go to a provincial court and ask a judge to condemn any other Canadian and punish him in advance for a hate crime, an emotion crime he has not yet committed. Let me say that again. This bill lets you go to court and ask a judge to sentence someone for a crime you think he might commit, but he hasn't done it yet. It's straight out of Tom Cruise's movie, Minority Report. They haven't done anything yet. You're just afraid they will. But really, they're the ones who ought to be afraid of you, because you're going to destroy their lives now just by saying they've triggered you. Read this part, which doesn't just amend the Canadian Human Rights Act. This amends the criminal code. This creates a new crime, a pre-crime, or as they call it, fear of hate propaganda offense or hate crime. So not only are feelings crimes banned in Canada, you can't have certain feelings in Canada, but if someone has hatred in their heart, that's a crime. But if you fear that someone may have hatred in their heart, you can prosecute them in court. I'm not even kidding, but I wish I were. Let me read it to you in full. Section 810.0121 of the Criminal Code will be amended to read, a person may, with the Attorney General's consent, lay in information before a provincial court judge if the person fears on reasonable grounds that another person will commit A, an offense under Section 318 or 319, those are the feelings crimes I read to you before. B, an offense under subsection 430, that's mischief under the criminal code. Or C, an offense motivated by bias, prejudice, or hate based on race, national or ethnic origin, language, color, religion, sex, age, mental or physical disability, sexual orientation, gender identity or expression, or any other similar factor. So no making fun of those transgender athletes at the Olympics, guys, or you'll wind up in jail. So let's recap. If someone out there who you don't like has not broken the law yet, they haven't done anything to you yet, but you're afraid they might, you have fear that they might, you can go to court and strike first. If you're some leftist who is afraid of conservatives, go to court, and if a judge says your fear is reasonable, he'll lock up the person you're afraid of. Even if that person hasn't done anything, doesn't do anything, won't ever do anything, you can get an order against him. See for yourself. Let me quote. If the provincial court judge before whom the parties appear is satisfied by the evidence adduced that the informant has reasonable grounds for the fear, the judge may order that the defendant enter into a recognizance to keep the peace and be of good behavior for a period of not more than 12 months. So the judge isn't determining whether or not that guy is going to commit a crime. That's not what's on trial. It's whether or not your fear is reasonable. You can go to court and say, Your Honor, I'm really, really afraid. And the judge says, well, is that true, or is that a reasonable fear? And if you're afraid of someone, if you can convince a court you're afraid of something, if you can convince a court that it was fair that you were triggered, you can cancel someone in real life. If that person doesn't comply, he goes straight to jail. The provincial court judge may commit the defendant to prison for a term of not more than 12 months if the defendant fails or refuses to enter into the recognizance. So if you really hate someone, and the left is full of hate, say you're an angry Black Lives Matter leftist full of hate, say you're a hateful environmental extremist, someone Trudeau considers part of his coalition, maybe his, I don't know, Minister Stephen Guilbeault, who's actually so full of hate he became a criminal. You just go to a judge and say, I'm really afraid of that white guy or that oil man or that conservative. Or I'm really afraid of Rex Murphy. I'm really afraid of Conrad. I'm really afraid of Ezra Levant or Rebel News. I'm afraid of Maxime Bernier or Derek Sloan or even Aaron O'Toole. I'm really afraid of them, Your Honor. No, they haven't done anything yet. No, they haven't committed any crime. No, but I'm afraid that they hate me, and I want you, judge, to strike first against them, and a judge now can. And here's what a judge can do to the official enemies list, because you know this will only be implemented against the enemies of the state. I rarely meet anyone more hate-filled than a woke college leftist, but they will never be charged. They'll be the ones doing the complaining. I mean, all the cancel culture on campus, that's terrible. But what's the worst that can happen? You embarrass someone, all right. you get them kicked out of university, or you get them fired. I mean, that's not great. But look at the weaponization of cancel culture that Trudeau just proposed in Bill C-36. This is the list of things in Bill C-36 that the government can do if they think you might, in the future, commit one of these emotion crimes. So if you're convicted of a pre-crime, these are the conditions and recognizance they can order you to do. The provincial court judge may add any reasonable conditions to the recognizance that the judge considers desirable to secure the good conduct of the defendant, including conditions that A, require the defendant to wear an electronic monitoring device if the Attorney General makes that request. Because you know that hateful feelings can be tracked on a GPS. B, require the defendant to return to and remain at their place of residence at specified times. So that's a curfew, because you know that hateful feelings come out at night. C, require the defendant to abstain from the consumption of drugs, except in accordance with a medical prescription, of alcohol or any other intoxicating substance. Seriously, you can get your enemy banned from drinking if you say you're really afraid of them. D, require the defendant to provide, for the purpose of analysis, a sample of a bodily substance prescribed by regulation on the demand of a peace officer. So you have to give a sample, including a blood sample, I presume, on demand, because you're such a hater, we need a sample of your blood. And this, to prohibit the defendant from communicating directly or indirectly with any person identified in the recognizance, or refrain from going to any place specified in the recognizance, except in accordance with the conditions specified in the recognizance that the judge considers necessary. So you can be banned from talking to friends or family or political colleagues or employees or whomever. Literally, because some political activist claims he's afraid of you, he can get the government to ban you from talking to anyone or going anywhere. Have you even heard of this before? Have you ever heard of this anywhere? Obviously, they'll seize your otherwise lawful guns. The provincial court judge shall consider whether it is desirable in the interest of the defendant's safety or that of any other person to prohibit the defendant from possessing any firearm, crossbow, prohibited weapon, restricted weapon, prohibited device, or ammunition. What is all this? Is that an anti-hate law? No, it isn't. It will not reduce hate. I think it will increase hate. It will certainly not convince anyone that their opinions are wrong, let alone that their emotions are wrong. But I'm pretty sure it will cause hurt feelings. It'll cause hard feelings. It'll cause feelings of grievance, which are the source of so much hate. But you know, I think that's actually what Trudeau wants. That's part of the political strategy behind cancel culture and wokeness and extreme critical race theory and all this racial and gender identity these days. It's to pit us against each other perpetually, to divide us, to plant strife, not harmony. I actually think Canada works pretty well. I think it's a pretty harmonious place. I live in Toronto, a majority-minority city. I think there are problems in Toronto, but I really don't think there are systemic barriers for minorities to get ahead in business or politics or sports or entertainment or policing or in law. I just don't see it. I see an attempt by the Liberal Party to mimic the racial identity politics of the US, even though we don't have their same history of slavery and Jim Crow laws. We just don't. We're where the Underground Railroad went to. I see an attempt to force people into thinking of themselves as anything but Canadians. I think Trudeau is trying to destroy our Canadian identity, including our Canadian history and icons. I see a lot of hate in Trudeau, honestly. A hate for our country's history, including a hatred for our founder, Sir John A. Macdonald himself. I think Trudeau hates his opponents, obviously. He hates his critics. He hates Alberta. To be honest, he hates anyone who tells him no. We know who he loves, though. We know who he admires.
There's a level of admiration I actually have for China, because their basic dictatorship is allowing them to actually turn their economy around on a dime.
Yeah, it shows. Trudeau's always loved tyrannies. He loved Castro. He loves China, just like his dad, Pierre Trudeau, loved the Soviet Union. This bill, C-36, it's not a law that any democracy could have. It criminalizes feelings. It admits that it does. It allows secret trials and secret informants. It's a censorship law, but more than any of that, this law allows Trudeau's attack dogs, including his paid race hustlers like the Canadian Anti-Hate Network and hucksters like Yaniv, or anyone with a grudge or a grievance, to milk the system, to secretly seek vengeance against their enemies, and to team up with Trudeau to destroy what little political opposition remains in this country. This is the worst bill I've ever seen. And I'm 100% certain it's going to become law if we don't stop it. I'm sure it'll get the unanimous support of the NDP, the Bloc, and 90% of the media and the lawyers in this country. We'll do our best to stop it, though. In the weeks ahead, I'll outline my plans. I'd like you to start by signing our petition at stopc36.com. At that link, we'll have the entire law. You can read it for yourself. This fight began yesterday. It's going to be many months. They'll probably have to reintroduce the law in the fall. So it's not a done deal yet. It's a terrible law, but I give you my word, we'll do our best here to fight it. That's an excerpt from my daily show, the Ezra Levant Show. Every day I do a monologue on the news of the day, then I interview an interesting guest, and then I read my hate mail. You gotta subscribe. Go to rebelnews.com.